2NURFM.com, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
23 to 10, we like to keep an eye on what's happening with state and federal politics. We do that as we invite down here the University of Newcastle's Associate Professor in Politics, Dr. Jim Joes. Been a big week, a lot, still settling down, the dust settling after the election. Today we're taking a look at the Labor leadership which has been in the news. Jim?
Yeah, good morning, Dave. Yes, it's a moment now when the Labor Party has to settle down a little bit and sort out who's going to lead it into the next, shall we say, 3 years. The position of leader following a defeat is a bit of a poison chalice in some ways, because following a change of government, the new Prime Minister usually has a fairly strong honeymoon period of 2 or 3 months, maybe longer, depending on how the issues play out. So the person who's elected the leader of the opposition, in this case the Labor Party, faces a bit of an uphill battle trying to make inroads. So in some respects people don't jump off their chairs and put their hands up and say, hey, I want to be leader. They think about it fairly carefully. Now, Bill Shorten's put his hand up, and there was a chance at one stage where he was going to be the only contender. But now Anthony Albanese has also put his hand up. So we have a candidate sort of from the left, which is Anthony.
What are they like? Are they different, these two characters? Are they different in their personalities and character?
I think they're both fairly level-headed and, shall we say, stable as potential leaders. And by stable, I mean that they think about what they're doing and they consult generally fairly widely, and they enjoy a fair degree of support around their particular factional bases. Albanese's from the left, Shorten's sort of from the right, but the sort of left-right distinction here is a bit blurry because they're both sort of trying to hold the middle ground as well. So it's more a case that I guess Anthony Albanese has sort of been around a lot longer than Bill Shorten, and perhaps feels that he's the person. But on the other hand, Bill Shorten was one that during both the Rudd and Gillard era, one might have thought might have been a potential leader, and sure enough, he's moving in that direction. He might be a bit slipperier, shall we say, than Anthony Albanese, because it was basically Bill Shorten who ensured that Julia Gillard wouldn't lead the party to the polls as Prime Minister. He changed his mind, changed his support, and opted for, as we know, for Kevin Rudd to come back. The thing that the Labor Party's got to try and move away from is that their leadership issues are really only about how we can win government, or how we can, prior to the election, how we could stay in government. Those sorts of I think those sorts of approaches have done the Labor Party a bit of damage, and they've got to actually repair that damage and be seen not just as an opposition looking to become the government, but the leadership has to be seen as something that is not simply about we're the best leader who can bring us back into government. I'm not sure that I've expressed that quite as succinctly as I would like.
What is the process now for electing the leader of the party?
Well, under the new rules that Kevin Rudd brought in, basically the Parliamentary Labor Party, the Labor caucus, will have a vote, and that vote will count for 50% of the result. The other 50% will be drawn from the branches, the sub-branches all around Australia, and paid-up members of those branches will then vote on the candidates on Anthony Albanese or for Bill Shorten, and then the results of both ballots will be pooled, and that will determine the outcome. This will be a depending on how efficient the Labor Party is in organising its sub-branches, it could take a month or more for them to finalise the vote. This is not that unusual. In Britain, I think Tony Blair, when he was elected leader back in the mid-90s, it took 2 months for the Labor Party to finalise a leader. The Conservative Party took a couple of months to choose its leader in David Cameron. So it's really not that unusual in shall we say, Western democracies for this process to happen. It's the first time that the Labor Party has gone outside the parliamentary party to elect a leader, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. The Greens, the Australian Democrats, all had plebiscites of the full membership rather than simply of those who were elected to the parliament. So it's not unusual in Australian politics for this to happen.
Let's take a look at the other side now. We've seen what's happened since Tony Abbott has stepped in the role as, of course, he is Prime Minister-elect at the moment. What about the establishment of his party and who's around him and the roles they've taken on? What's your thoughts on that? Was there any surprises?
Well, not really. Insofar as a number of his front bench either were retiring, of his shadow cabinet were retiring, or didn't get elected. So he's had to change that around a little bit. Perhaps one of the disappointing outcomes was Bob Baldwin not getting a Guernsey in either the outer ministry or the cabinet. One perhaps wouldn't have expected him in the cabinet, but perhaps one would have expected, given his service in the parliament, his experience.
He's a strong member, a lot of loyalty from the constituents.
Yes, that's certainly the case. And he, in the outgoing Howard government, he had a year as a minister. Well, actually, no, he didn't. Sorry, let me correct that. He was a parliamentary secretary, which is like an assistant minister. And then there was in the shadow ministry under Brendan Nelson, and then again Tony Abbott. He was in the outer ministry, and one would have expected that he might have moved up, but he was pushed, shall we say, down into a parliamentary secretary role, which is not to be sneezed at by any means, Dave, but it would seem that Tony Abbott has a different agenda, and whether that's because Bob Baldwin was not seen as strictly a loyal Abbott supporter, wavering with a bit of support for Turnbull in the past, or whether it was just simply that there were too many debts that Tony Abbott owed to other supporters in the party, that there was just no space left over for Bob Baldwin to be in the ministry. So we'll never really know the detail of that. I suppose there's the issue that's been floating around as well, that there's only one woman in the cabinet and only 5 in total in the ministry. That's partly a reflection of the number of women in the party that are elected to the parliament, and it's partly a reflection also of the fact that some of the women that are elected haven't yet had sufficient experience. Although I notice a couple of men have only been in the parliament a couple of years, and they've managed to bounce into those ranks. And I think it was Senator Boyce. She's retiring in July. She's given the party a bit of a serve over its, not so much its current membership, but over its lack of support and recruitment of good women candidates. In terms of the candidates that were fielded by the Liberal Party, I think that's probably a bit harsh, but I think she's right on the money when she talks about the actual structures within the party are not conducive to promoting women into senior posts. It's pleasing, I think, to see that the only senior woman, Julie Bishop, is actually the Minister for Foreign Affairs, which is a very senior position. So the one woman in the cabinet is in fact in a senior position, which is unusual. Well, when I say unusual, in the past, very often women have been put into the nurturing portfolios like social services or family, rather than into some of the more
important,
the more, shall we say, the ones that men have occupied in the past. So that's a sort of interesting development. And Tony Abbott's fielding a little bit of flack at the moment, but I think that over time this will begin to change as things settle down a bit. But at present, if we were to look at the balance of the two parties in terms of how they're responding to the post-election time, Dave, I think Tony Abbott sort of played a very settling role, and he's just taking things very, very steady. And the Labor Party need to be fairly careful here that their leadership process doesn't blow up into becoming another sort of circus, which they've been very good at doing in the past. So we'll wait and see whether they manage to do things in a quiet and subdued way.
Well, thanks for your thoughts on that, Jim.
My pleasure, Dave. I'll see you next week.
Next Tuesday morning. We'll look forward to it too. Joining us from the University of Newcastle, Associate Professor in Politics, Dr. Jim Joes.